Okay, welcome. This is Jennifer with Powered by Education, and I'm joined by Rebecca Wright. She's the director of the IEA program in Tennessee, and we're going to give it just a couple of minutes just to make sure, give everybody a chance to join. It's early in the morning, so if we'll just give it a couple of minutes to. Just to see if anybody hops on. I do have a whole list of questions. I'm excited. I'm excited to ask you. We've been collecting these questions for some time, and had a lot of questions out of the last school year on, how to apply, how to qualify, um, what it covers, and what schools you can use it for. So lots of great questions. Can't wait to dive in. Rebecca, I will go ahead and let you kind of introduce yourself. Tell us what you do, what you did before, and how you came about to work, because this is a relatively new program. So, how did you come to work? How did you come to work with the IEA program, and kind of what's your background?
Yeah, sure. So I have been with the IEA program since it began. So in July of 2015, it's been a little over 3 years, which is kind of crazy. It seems that time has flown by very fast. Before coming to this program, I was already at the State Department in a different role with policy and communications. But I really started my career in education as a teacher. I used to teach middle school. I loved it. I kind of miss it some days. But school choice has always been an interest, a passion of mine. I did a lot of research in a prior role about school choice. And so when this program came about and I had the opportunity to work with it, it just felt like the perfect fit. And it's been an incredibly exciting adventure, as we like to call the IEA program. But yeah, so in this role for 3 years, we have a small team, myself, and then two others, and we are solely dedicated to this program.
That's really exciting. You said that you were a supporter of school choice, and we're all about school choice at Powered by Education. We serve families across the country, and have a big group in Tennessee, actually, and we believe every choice is not for every child, but every child should have every choice. So that's kind of how we run everything through, and we think about how these options are the more options the better that kids can have access to. And so the IEA program fits perfectly in that. It's just really is a great, just uh, a great program to encourage students that need something that they're not getting at their home school, so at their neighborhood school. So tell us a little bit about the IEA program, how it started, and you said 3 years. It's been around for 3 years.
Yeah, so the law passed 3 years ago. It passed in the spring of 2015. It's really the first of its kind to ever pass through the state legislature. There's been bills of a similar nature proposed for years, maybe even a decade or more, and this is the first one that Tennessee actually passed. So it was kind of a brand new thing for us in Tennessee. And the program actually launched in January of 2017. So we had about 18 months or so to get the program up and running, which was actually a very short amount of time given the amount of work involved in developing a program like this. And we launched mid-year. So that was an interesting experience as well. So the program is now in its third year of implementation, but it's really our second full year, this 2018-19 school year. So we like to talk about the program as a choice program for students with disabilities that essentially, kind of like what you said, it gives parents another option if they are looking to put their child in a private or a homeschool and to be able to access public funds to be able to pay for some of those private and homeschool education expenses. It doesn't cover everything. It's not for all education expenses, but it does cover a lot of the major expenses that parents would probably be spending funds on, their personal funds on, if they didn't have access to this program.
That's exciting. So one of the things that I think is not commonly known is that the IEA can cover homeschool expenses, which is super interesting. So is there? I'll kind of start at the beginning, and we'll kind of walk through because I have so many questions on, the who, what, when, where, and how this all works. So when is there a deadline to apply for this every year?
Yes, so we launch applications each year in January, and then the application deadline changes year to year. This past year it was March 30th, and next year I believe it's April 15th. So it's in the spring.
In the spring. So you apply the spring before the fall semester starts.
Yes.
And how long does that take? Once, is it a lengthy application? Is it an online application? Does it have to be done in person? How does that work?
Yeah, so it is an online application, but if parents don't have access to a computer, it can be done on your smartphone as well. But if you don't have internet access, then we can also send you a paper form. Parents can get a paper form in the mail. And it's a pretty short application as long as you know the information about your child on the front end. That really helps speed it up. Like you'll need to know your child's educational records, their IEP, what their disabilities are on their IEP. But as long as you have that information and you have a copy of like a driver's license or something to prove who you are and that you are the parent of your child, which would be like a birth certificate or something like that, then it should be a relatively easy application to complete, like 5 or 10 minutes.
That's exciting. Okay, that's exciting. Don't you love it when something is like streamlined? There's not a lot of hoops to jump through and hurdles for families to obstacles to accessing this program. That's really exciting. So they would fill out the application, and then what students can qualify for this IEA? What would a student have to prove in order to qualify for this program in Tennessee?
Great question. So each state is a little different with their programs. And in Tennessee, the student eligibility criteria is set in the state law. So the state law says that in order to qualify, students must be in Tennessee. They must be a resident of Tennessee. They have to be in public school for the full school year prior to when they enroll in IEA. So, for example, if you're looking at enrolling in the 2019-20 school year, you would need to have your child in a public school for the entire 2017-18 school year. The two exceptions to that is if they're enrolling in kindergarten for the first time, because then they wouldn't have been able to be in public school the year prior, or if they moved to Tennessee sometime during that 2017-18 school year. So that's the first thing, or the second thing rather. The third thing is that they would need to have an active IEP through their public school. So the child would need to have an individualized education plan or program in their public school, and then they would need to have one of the 9 qualifying disabilities listed as their primary or secondary disability on their IEP. So this is not a program for all students with disabilities. It's currently only open to students with one of 9 qualifying disabilities. And they have to on their IEP.
That's interesting. Okay, so one of 9, and I don't want to put you on the spot and ask you to list all 9, but
I can.
Can you? Okay, if you list the 9, I'll have somebody put them in the comment section so that families that are watching this later can refer back to those 9. So it's 9 specific diagnoses. What are those? If you have them.
Yeah, so they're autism, deafblindness, developmental delay, hearing impairments, intellectual disabilities. I may be going too fast, I can slow down. But so autism, deafblindness, developmental delay, hearing impairments, intellectual disability, multiple disabilities, orthopedic impairments, traumatic brain injury, and visual impairments.
That's quite comprehensive. I mean, that's a quite a comprehensive list. One of the things I just want to touch on that you mentioned as one of the qualifications, obviously, for the Tennessee IEA, you live in the state of Tennessee, but also one of the other things you mentioned was the need to be enrolled in a public school the prior year. So the deadline for this fall has passed, and
Yep.
the next deadline would be in the spring of 2019. So this 2018-19 school year, if they're looking to apply for that, they would need to be enrolled in a public school for this entire school year in order to qualify in the spring. Does that, it doesn't include a private school student. They would have to be enrolled in a public school. And would that include like a virtual public school if they're enrolled in a virtual public school?
Yeah, definitely. Or a public charter school, as long as it's a public school in Tennessee.
Okay, that's great. Okay, that's great. So, is there an application fee to apply?
Nope, it's free to parents.
That's
And we
great.
mail you out. We pay for the postage and everything. So,
Oh,
yeah, it's totally free.
that's great. And tell me about how many students you have apply every year.
So it varies year to year. We typically get 130 to 150 applications over the past couple of years. And then some parents go ahead and apply if they're not sure whether it's something they're interested in, but they go ahead and get that application in just to make sure they meet that deadline. So we definitely tell parents if it's something you're thinking about, even if you're not sure, go ahead and apply so you meet that deadline, and then you can always withdraw your application later if you decide you don't want to do it.
Yeah, so do you have students that apply for it and stay in the school that they're coming from, or do once they receive those funds, they choose to either go to a private school or to homeschool?
Great question. So once a student is enrolled in the program, and the official date of enrollment will always be August 1st each year. So come August 1st, the student would need to have withdrawn from the public school system as of that date and then go to some sort of either private or homeschool. So they'll have to be in a non-public school once they're in IEA.
That's fascinating. Is it the same set amount year to year, or does it fluctuate or depend on the IEP?
Yeah, so the amount does change year to year, and it's actually based on the district the student lives in. So each district has a different amount, and all the students in that district will receive the same amount. So we post those funding lists on our website. We update them each July, so the parents know for that coming school year how much they would be getting, and then we pay that amount out over the course of 10 payments during the school year.
Okay, so that's interesting. That's something I didn't know. So that the amount is set by the district and then it's paid over. And so when's the first installment?
So about September 1st, end of August is usually when parents get the payment. We have approximate payment dates. They're not set in stone because they go through kind of multiple processes to get out, but it's usually around September 1st. And then the average statewide is about $6,900. It's about $690 per payment.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you, was how much the kind of the average is. So about $6,900. And now help me understand, one of the things that I had talked to a couple of people this last school year, and they said that there were partner schools. Now, explain to me.
I think I'm having a little trouble hearing you, but I think your question was about how schools apply to the program and become
Yeah, what is a partner school? What are they? Do you have to attend with those funds? Do you have to attend a partner school? And what is a partner school?
Yeah. So parents can send their child to any non-public school. So you can homeschool them, you can send them to a private school. We do have a list of, we call them participating schools, who are schools that have applied to participate in this program. And what that means is that they are able to accept the IEA debit card, the IEA funds in payment for like tuition and fees at their school. So if you're wanting to use the funds to pay for private school tuition, you would have to have your child enrolled in a school that's participating in the program. Otherwise, and we have a lot of parents who do this, they send their child to a non-participating school, so a school that's not participating, or they homeschool them and they'll use the funds for other things other than tuition. But we do have 14 schools this year that are participating in the program and can accept those funds.
That's amazing. Where are the participating schools located?
They're primarily kind of in the Middle Tennessee area. We have a lot in Chattanooga, Nashville, a few north of Nashville. We have a couple in West Tennessee, like in the Shelby County area. And we've got a few more rural schools. So there's kind of one that's about halfway between Nashville and Shelby. And then we have a couple out in the Knoxville area. And there's one that's kind of halfway between Knoxville and Nashville. So they're kind of spread out, but they're concentrated in the kind of three larger school districts.
And so if you were receiving the funds, you mentioned something about a card. Is that how families receive funds? How does that work?
Yeah, so we set up a debit card specifically for the program for each parent, and we will send that debit card to them in the mail. And then we load the funds onto that debit card. And it works just like a normal debit card. They can get access to their account statements, they can get payment alerts, but it doesn't allow them to take cash out. And then there's some restrictions on where they can use the debit card at, because there are certain places that you wouldn't have educational related expenses. So there's some kind of safeguards there, but otherwise it works just like a normal debit card would.
That's interesting. So what are some of the education related expenses? So if they choose to enroll their child in a private school that is not a participating school, that's allowed, those funds just would not go towards their tuition. They would be used for other educational expenses. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so what other educational expenses could it be used for?
There's a lot. We have about 14 different approved expenses, so it's very flexible. Some examples are educational therapy, tutoring services, curriculum, computer hardware, transportation. And then we also have in Tennessee something called an ABLE savings account, which is a way for parents to save funds for their children with disabilities and use those funds at a later purpose. And they can actually use these IEA funds to make contributions to those savings accounts and use those funds at a later date. So there's a lot of different ways that the funds can be used. But a lot of our parents use them for like curriculum and therapy and tutoring.
What an incredible program. I can't imagine why. Do you limit the number every year? Do you have a limit on the number of applicants that you'll accept every year?
We have no cap. So as long as a student is eligible and the parent follows all the enrollment requirements, and the student is accepted into the program. So we don't have a cap. We can have out as many of these as apply and become eligible.
Okay, I'm just going to ask you to repeat that. So what is the cap?
There's not a cap. So we can allow in as many students as apply and are eligible. So as long as a parent follows the enrollment process, they can get in.
I just can't believe that.
Yeah, it's great. And there's not a question we get a lot is there an income requirement? There's not. So there's no income requirement to join the program either.
This is incredible. I mean, the fact that there's no cap, it's not competitive. You can just apply, and it's an easy application. I don't know why you're not just overrun with applications. I can't imagine. This is such a gift to the state of Tennessee. So, do you foresee that? Do you foresee that picking up in as more people become aware? I know a lot of families that we've talked to weren't aware that this was even an option. So, do you feel like that will change as the word gets out and people get more familiar with this process?
Yeah, I definitely expect the program to grow each year, especially since we're so new. And I think that also depends on, a lot of parents are looking for private schools. And so as our private school participation, if that increases, that could also result in an increase in students who are able to benefit from the program.
Yeah, talk a little bit about that. Like how what a school has to do to become a participating school. We don't. We do have some teachers and administrators that follow us, that support us. So talk a little bit about how they would become participating schools.
Yeah, so it's a simple application process. It's an online application, like parents, and they fill out the application. They'll need to send to us like their school calendar and their tuition and fees schedule, and then either it's a surety bond or a CPA statement, essentially something that says that they are uh, financially okay. They're not going to go bankrupt in the next year. So we safeguard the parents who are using their funds at the school. They submit that paperwork to us, and it's usually a 30-day review timeline. And if they're approved, they get posted on our list, and parents can use the funds there. And school applications are open year-round, so they don't have a deadline when they need to apply. So there's schools out there that missed the spring timeframe. The applications are still open. They can still join for the school year.
That's incredible. Is there a reason why a private school might not want to participate? Is there a reason why every private school wouldn't participate?
I think we hear two things a lot from private schools. One is they're not sure that they have the services the educational services that students in this program need, because this is a program for students with certain types of disabilities. And so there's not a whole lot of schools necessarily that are equipped to serve students in this program. So that's one, they have to make sure that they have the educational resources available. And then two, I think there's a kind of just a fear sometimes of government, a state government being involved, and there's a fear that joining this program is going to mean the government has control over their curriculum or testing or other things. And we tried to do our best to alleviate that. And we have a private school handbook that says this does not mean the state can go in and dictate your curriculum or anything else. It's nothing, it doesn't increase our authority as the state over you as a school. The only thing is related to you accepting these funds. And so it's really, I think there's a lot of fear about government control, and it's really not. It's very limited in our scope, and it's solely related to IEA. So we hope that those fears can be alleviated.
Well, that's an interesting point that you would bring up. So, what about are there any other requirements for schools? Do you allow faith-based schools, or is there any required testing of students that attend these private schools? Are there things that kind of are stipulations that might exclude certain schools?
So I don't think that these things should be excluding schools, but it's possible. One is that they have to comply with all the health and safety laws of any non-public school in Tennessee, which if they're in Tennessee, they should be following that law anyway. They have to make sure that their employees pass criminal background checks. IEA does have a stringent criminal background check rule, which some schools may not be using that level of background checks. So they would want to make sure that all their employees are doing that. And then, there's the only testing piece is specifically for students in the IEA program. And there is a requirement if you're a child in the IEA program and you're in grades 3 through 8, you have to take either a state assessment or an approved norm reference test in math and English language arts. So if a child is enrolling in a participating school and they're in the IEA program, they would need to be able to take one of those types of assessments. But what we found is that most of our, or if not all of our participating schools already provide those assessments anyways. So it doesn't seem to be a change from what schools are already doing. And then they just need to provide things like parent access to their child's educational records and letting their parents know how their child is doing. So it's really what we consider a very kind of basic level of making sure you're providing a safe environment for these students and providing information to parents about their child's academic progress. It's really more of a parent choice.
Yes, I love the way that's in. And what it cut out earlier, but you did say religious schools are not exempt. Is that correct?
And we don't have any requirements in relation to religious, non-religious, or even accreditation. So it's really wide open.
Oh, that's interesting. Jessica has a question. How do we find out which schools participate?
So we have that list posted on the IEA webpage. It's on our main webpage. So if you go to tn.gov/education/IEA, it's right there. It says 2018-19 participating schools.
That's great. We'll drop that. We'll make sure and drop that in the comments so that it's easy reference for anybody that's watching this later. This is some great information. And so the testing that you were talking about, you referenced that they would take norm reference tests at throughout the year, and they take those at the school that they're attending. This isn't something they're and you're not even requiring the schools to provide this to all students, though most
Right.
of them do. I think
Right.
most of them do, but you're just requiring that the student receiving the funds is being tested once a year, correct?
Yes, once a year. And that's only if the parent requests the school to administer the test. So some parents go through testing companies outside of the school, but usually I think the majority of our parents, in fact, all of our parents who have students in the participating schools, the schools were already administering the assessments. So it wasn't a change.
That's great. This is really, I'm waiting for you to mention the downsides. I'm waiting for you to, to list the obstacles. And this just sounds like an incredible program. Do you ever foresee it being expanded to to other IEPs or to students that weren't previously enrolled in public school? Do you ever see this program being expanded any?
Yeah, so there are a few obstacles, and I think they're worth mentioning, and I can answer your question as well. But one thing we definitely want parents to be aware of before applying is that if your child enrolls in this program, you are waiving all of your child's rights through the federal disabilities law, the IDEA law that guarantees them rights and services through the public school system. So you're having to waive all of that. So that's something parents really should be aware of. They don't have any of those services or wouldn't be able to get any services through
I'll
the
mention it later.
system. And then the other thing is it is a lot of responsibility to track how you're using the funds, making sure you're using them appropriately, and then you have to report those funds and use the funds to the department on a quarterly basis. So that's a lot of responsibility for parents, especially because there's so many ways the funds can be used, making sure you're using those appropriately and reporting that correct information to the department. That can be a lot for parents. So those are just two things I think parents should just be aware of. But going to your question about is it possible for this program to expand? It's entirely possible. Up to the legislature, they could always choose to amend the law and expand the eligibility criteria, but that would definitely be something the legislature would have to do.
That's a good point. That's not a programming issue. That's a state government. That's a state government decision and a state government issue. I think we have another question. Let me see if they can put that up on the screen. Can you see that? Do they have to take other standardized tests?
So if the student is in grades 3 through 8, the only test that you have to take is either, and as a parent, you would choose either the state TCAP assessment in math and English language arts, or you can have them take one of the norm reference tests approved for the program. And we have a list of those in our parent handbook. So either one of those in English language arts and math each year, an annual assessment. And that's only for grades 3 through 8. Now, the caveat to that is, or there's one additional piece rather, if you're independently homeschooling, there's a separate homeschool law that has some testing requirements. So for IEA, those are the only testing requirements, but parents should be aware that there's a separate homeschool law that has additional testing requirements in addition to IEA.
That's correct. That's correct. So there are different. So if they're homeschooled, they wouldn't necessarily have to take that yearly norm reference test. There's some certain. Do you know off the top of your head what what the testing requirements are for the homeschool students?
Yeah, so the testing requirements are different depending on whether you are independently homeschooling, which means you're doing everything on your own, or if you're going through like a private school, an umbrella program. So parents who homeschool through an umbrella program, they don't have any additional homeschool testing requirements. But if they're doing everything on their own, they're independently homeschooling, then their child has to be tested in grades 5, 7, and 9. And they'll need to take either the state TCAP assessments, or there's some alternate options that they can take as well. So usually if they're independently homeschooling and they're meeting those, the IEA testing requirements in those grades 5 and 7, they're usually the same tests that you would take. So it's usually not duplicative, but there's that additional grade level, grade 9 for the homeschool law that parents would need to make sure their child is being tested and meeting those requirements as well.
Yeah, so if I understand you right, if they're homeschooling under an umbrella, one of the umbrellas in Tennessee, then they would not have any additional testing. Is that through the IEA program? Is that correct?
So they'd have to meet the IEA testing requirements, but there's not an additional set of homeschool testing requirements. So as long as they're meeting the IEA testing requirements, they're fine.
I see. So they would be testing every year. They would be testing through. And tell me a little bit about what that testing does. Are there consequences to this? Is this just data monitoring, or are there certain repercussions if they don't meet certain benchmarks or certain progress, progress benchmarks? Like, how does that? What is the testing then used for in the IEA program?
So that's a great question. It's one we get a lot from parents. The way the law is written, the only thing that the State Department uses the test results for is to make sure the student has actually taken the assessments. So we don't do anything with those scores. We don't even track them. We don't record them anywhere. We just get them and check a box saying, okay, this parent has had their child take an assessment. So that's all we do with them. It's really for parent information. The goal of that piece was to make sure parents were getting information on their child's academic progress. Now, that being said, that's all the IEA team does with the data. If you're independently homeschooling in those grades 5, 7, and 9, the homeschool law does have some achievement benchmarks that students will need to meet and be in compliance with. But that's a separate team, so I can't really go into details on that. I don't really know about that, but that'd just be something for parents if they're independently homeschooling to be aware of. Oh, now I can't hear you again.
Sorry. I think my phone freaked out for a minute. That's interesting. So really, you're saying that these scores cannot be used against them, that parents get that data and that information. So you're really empowering parents with we're equipping you to do what's best for your child, and then we're going to give you data on how that's going. So do parents receive a copy of the scores as well?
Yeah, so the scores, regardless of what test they take, the parents should get a copy of the scores. If they take the state test, the test results do go to the parent. So, and that, depending on the norm reference test, I would imagine the testing companies or schools would give them those score results.
That's great. I can't think of a better way to use testing than to give parents feedback on how well their chosen option is working for their students. So what a great, and it also kind of alleviates some of the testing pressure that students feel, when they're taking these tests. And because really it's just for feedback and information, which does alleviate a lot of pressure. So do you have any students? You've only been around 3 years, so have you graduated any students that have used these resources for high school?
We do have some high school students in the program. We haven't had any who've graduated from high school while in the IEA program, but we may have some this year, because we do have that option that if parents, they have to spend at least 50% of the IEA amount they receive each year, but they could technically save that other 50% in their debit card account And then if the student graduates from high school and they have those saved funds left over, the student could use those saved funds in their debit card account to pay for post-secondary tuition and certain types of fees. So it could be a way that parents could kind of save for college in a sense if they've been in the program for a while.
That's really cool that you can use that for, towards college. That's a huge savings. Even if you spent, half of the, average 6,900, if you saved half of that for tuition, that's a huge savings. Tell me about when you have a student that is homeschooling and they are in, an umbrella program and they still have to test for the IEA. Where do they go for that testing? Uh, because if they're not in proximity to a participating school, then where would they go for that testing?
So a lot of umbrella programs actually provide the norm reference tests that are approved for IEA. So a lot of parents just go to their umbrella program to have their child tested. Some parents have their child go back to their district and test. So a lot of homeschool families will go back to the district and the district can provide like the state TCAP assessments. And then we have some parents who just go through a local testing center or order the test online, and they'll actually send people like test administrators to the parent's house and administer the assessments in the child's home. So there's a lot of cool ways that parents can get access to the assessments that in a way that best meets their child's assessment needs.
That's so exciting. And there's not a cost to that, right? I mean, is that provided free of charge?
So the norm reference tests, those are obviously through private testing companies. So they would have to probably pay for those unless they're through their private school, but they can use IEA funds to cover those test costs. So it shouldn't be anything they're having to pay out of their personal funds.
So it wouldn't be prohibitive. This is super exciting. I think we have another question. Let me see if they can put it up there.
Uh, Grade requirement. So it's the question about certain grade requirements. There's not, the department doesn't monitor students' academics at all in this program. That is totally up to you as the parent. You are taking on that responsibility to make sure your child is being educated. So we don't ask for progress reports or anything like that. And in terms of like the other type of grade, just in case I'll cover all my bases, it's for grades K through 12, if I didn't mention that before. So as long as the student is in grades K through 12, they can continue to participate in the program.
And do they apply every year? Do they, is it a new application every year, or or once they're in the program, they can stay in the program indefinitely?
Yeah, so they do have to submit a renewal application each year. It's super short. It's just the parents' information and the students' information. They don't have to send in all that documentation or anything again. And then they'll sign the contract each year. So they'll have an annual renewal application and contract. And then they'll need to, of course, let their district know they're continuing on in the program.
I want to go back to something you said about a couple of the obstacles, and I want to focus on this. I could go on for days about how excited I am about this program, and I think it's underutilized, and it's my mission to make sure more Tennessee families know about this. Schools are participating, and students have access to this. I think it's incredible. What a gift to Tennessee. But I do want to talk about a couple of the obstacles that you mentioned, and one of them you said was the reporting. So tell me how that reporting works, where it's done. You said it was quarterly reporting by the parents, and kind of tell me how that works.
Yeah. So since this program is for funds to be used for certain types of approved expenses, parents do have to report how they're using those funds to the state so we can monitor those uses of funds. So each quarter, parents will fill out an online form. We call it an expense report form. And they essentially just say what they use the funds on. And then they upload and submit copies of the receipts that support what information they put in that expense report. And the good thing about our form is it's relatively easy. It's an online form, and parents can access it through their smartphones or their computer. and parents can actually enter the information into the form as they spend the funds and just save it, and they'll get a link sent to their email that they can just pull up that link when they're ready to add new information or new funds. So they can actually just kind of keep going with it. They can't attach the receipts until they're ready to submit it because they can't save those, but otherwise it should be something that they can do on an ongoing basis. And then they'll just submit that to the department. They do that each quarter, and we have detailed instructions in our parent handbook. Our handbook is super long, but it's super long because we want to make sure parents have everything they need to know and make it as easy as possible. And if parents don't have access to a computer or a smartphone, we can also mail them a paper copy of the form, and they can just mail it back to us.
That's so great. Okay, I love that accountability and the ease of reporting. You said one of the other obstacles had to do with your disability act and your disability rights. Tell me about that and what that means for families.
Yeah, so waiving their child's IDEA rights, which are the rights through the federal Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, essentially means that their child does not get any services through the public school system once they join this program. The child's IEP, that plan that details all the rights and services they get, that goes away the day they enroll in IEA. And a lot of students in private school and homeschool, and a lot of people don't know this either, is if you're a homeschool or private school student, you may get services through the public school system or district. But if you're in IEA, because you've waived those rights, you don't get anything through the public school system. So it can be a lot for parents, especially if there's a lot of services their child needs, to have to provide all of those services. And we encourage parents to check out the costs of those services in the private sector and to make sure that they'll have enough funding to be able to cover the costs of those services.
That's a great point. That is a great point. And I'm not even sure, enough Tennessee families know that if they're in private school or homeschool, that they can still have access to those resources. So let's say they waive their rights and they're in the IEA program, and at some point they want to go back to their public school. Now, is that possible? Would they have to be re-evaluated for an IEP, or can they? What's that process for getting back?
Yeah, so that's another great question. We have parents who withdraw from the program sometimes early in the school year, so they can withdraw from IEA day 2 in the program. That's totally their right. But if they put their child back in public school, they do have to request for that evaluation for services and essentially start the entire IEP process all over again. So it's not like they can just go back and just flip their IEP, switch back on. They have to start that process from scratch, which can take a good amount of time for students and families to go through. So it's something we definitely want parents to be aware of on the front end before they officially enroll in IEA.
Yeah, that is, you want to weigh that and not take that lightly, because that's a big decision. So you don't want to jump back and forth. You want to make sure that you have all that information. Rebecca, this is incredible. I cannot think of a question that we haven't asked, but I would love to post your contact information in the comments, just so that families that are watching this later can get their follow-up questions answered. I know that there's probably some things that we haven't hit on, but you've been amazing at just simplifying this and breaking it down. And I spent countless hours last year kind of researching this, talking to parents, talking to participating schools, and you've just in, I don't know how many minutes we've been in here, 30, 45 minutes, you have just simplified everything. So thank you so much for being here. I imagine that we'll have you back at some point, because this is an incredible program for Tennessee, and it's going to, it's completely empowering parents to make a decision for their child that best fits their child's needs. So, Rebecca, you're incredible. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Yes, thank you. Is there anything that you feel like we haven't covered that you would like to end with?
Yeah, so the posting the contact information is great. I think if you have our main email address, the iea.questions@tn.gov, that's the best way to reach us. And we also have a phone number. It's the 253-3781 number. I have to remember it for a second. I would just say the parent handbook is the best resource we have for parents. So if you're looking at this program, that is a great place for you to go and really see all the information. And yeah, I really appreciate y'all having me. We love talking to parents, so we just appreciate the opportunity. And you asked all the great questions, so I don't think I have anything else to add on top of that. So yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. And I hope you'll keep us posted on, application dates in the future so that we can be sure and get that out to all of our Tennessee families and make sure that they're aware that this is an option and that this is such a huge benefit for their families. So thanks so much for being here. I can't wait to have you back and keep us posted on any changes that we need to alert our families about. Thanks,
Thank
Rebecca.